are talking about how you have the numbers and nobody should go to Mlima because you have taken Mlima to be your 5 dom.
Wenyenchi, how are you doing? I hope you're doing fine. I'm also fine. What a day after a very long time. I hope you're good. Now, by the way, next Tuesday, whom are you voting for? High Court has just ruled that the elections should happen on the second Tuesday of this year. That is on 10th of August. Is it 10th or 11th? So, if the elections were to be held next week Tuesday, whom are you voting for? Anyway, that aside, a lot has happened in the political landscape and there are many shifts in the united opposition, with the latest being Justin Muturi and is it Lenny? Yeah. Complaining that Gachagua is trying to bully them into folding their parties and joining DCP. I want us to listen to them and after that analyze this and see what repercussions does this have to the united opposition and their possible clinging to the top leadership come 2027. Listen.
Unilateral pronouncements by one political leader purporting to direct, dissolve, merge, or determine the future of another political party are not only legally untenable, but are also deeply offensive.
Why are you saying, in the absence of those other leaders of those parties, why are you telling them to dissolve and join DCP? And you just, you formed your party the other day. You found these parties in existence.
We want to unite, but you can't unite with somebody belittling you, telling you to close your house and join his without any discussion on how parties manage. We have a legal process if you want.
It is the responsibility and obligation of every leader in these arrangements within the United Alternative Government to respect the existence of each of the other partner parties.
Ambaye ni rafiki yetu, ambaye amekaa bunge miaka 5, Mheshimiwa Ruto akamuondoa uongozini. Your Excellency, my brother, my leader, Wamunyoro, you are making us feel uncomfortable with you. You are talking about how you have the numbers and nobody should go to Mlima because you have taken Mlima to be your 5 dom. You believe that many of us who may not have 4 million votes cannot be president of Kenya. Sir, we are asking you, this time it is also our turn.
So, the big question is this. United opposition is handing Ruto his second term. I guess we'll find out. Now, as always, we'll have to start with the story. Let me begin with this story. Imagine 5 men want to travel from Nairobi to Mombasa. They have one matatu. The destination is written clearly on the windscreen, State House, which is one way. Everyone boards, but immediately after leaving Nairobi, the arguments begin. One says, I want to sit on front. I want to sit in front seat. Another says, I brought the fuel. Another says, my region has more passengers, so I choose the route. Another says, nobody is dissolving my own matatu. And another is already asking who gets the driver's seat when we arrive. Meanwhile, the driver they are trying to defeat is sitting comfortably in another vehicle watching them fight over the steering wheel. Ladies and gentlemen, and if these people continue fighting like this, William Ruto may not need to defeat them. They may defeat themselves. Look at what is happening. Justin Muturi, Peter Munya, Lenny Kivuti, Richard Onyonka, Rigathi Gachagua. Kalonzo Musyoka, and Matiang'i. Different parties, different ambitions, different regional calculations, different ideas about who should lead. And somehow, they are supposed to convince Kenyans that they are preparing to form one government. First, they need to agree on who gets the driver's seat. Then, they can explain where they are going. The latest quarrel revolves around party identity. Gachagua has been pushing DCP as the central vehicle of his political project, but Muturi, Munya and Kivuti have made it clear that they are not simply going to surrender their parties, and this is where we need to be fair to Gachagua. He has now denied asking those parties to fold into DCP, arguing that having several parties within the opposition could actually strengthen the coalition by giving it more agents and electoral infrastructure. That is actually a reasonable argument. But politically, the perception problem remains, because when your coalition partners are publicly saying, "Don't tell us to dissolve our parties," something has clearly gone wrong in the communication. You know, those Kenyan marriages where the couple says, "We are happily married," then 5 minutes later one spouse posts, "Some people should learn to respect boundaries." That is coalition politics. Everyone is saying, "We are united." Then someone gives an interview. Then another gives response. Then somebody says, "I was not consulted." Then another says, "We have numbers." Then another says, "You don't speak for us." That is not exactly marital bliss. The opposition has a deadline. 2027 is not waiting for them. Every day they spend fighting over party structures is a day Ruto's political machinery can spend organizing, and that is the strategic nightmare. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, Ol-Kalou. DCP's victory was enormous. Its candidate Sami Kamau Waweru received 35,440 votes, while UDA's candidate received 5,550. That is not a tiny margin. It is a political earthquake within the constituency. Gachagua understandably interpreted the result as evidence of a political realignment in Mount Kenya. And here is where I think the Ol-Kalou victory may have created a dangerous psychological effect. Confidence. Before Ol-Kalou, Gachagua needed to persuade people that DCP could win. After Ol-Kalou, he has evidence. And evidence can make politicians very confident. Sometimes too confident. We can see the likes of Murang'a Governor Irungu Kang'ata joining DCP after the Ol-Kalou win. And even the Tharaka Nithi Governor also joining. This is where we must put the brakes on the political excitement, not Tharaka Nithi, like Ipia. Ol-Kalou tells us something. It does not tell us everything. A by-election has different turnout, different candidates, different local issues, different campaign dynamics, and a much smaller electorate than a presidential election. So if anyone says DCP won Ol-Kalou, therefore Gachagua will win State House, that is political mathematics done with a calculator that has no batteries. But equally, if someone says it was only a by-election, therefore it means nothing, that is also nonsense. It means something. It demonstrates that DCP can defeat UDA decisively in at least one Mount Kenya contest. Then there was Onyonka's criticism, which is particularly interesting because it attacks the foundation of Gachagua's strategy. The argument is essentially, you cannot tell everybody that because Mount Kenya has millions of votes, everybody else must wait outside the State House queue. And that is an important warning, because the united opposition needs to answer one fundamental question. Is it building a national coalition or a collection of regional bargaining blocks? Those are not the same thing. Gachagua has a legitimate political argument. Mount Kenya is a massive voting bloc. It matters. But the danger comes when numerical strength becomes political entitlement. Because the moment another region hears, we have the numbers, therefore the presidency belongs to us, that region can respond, fine, then we also have our numbers, and suddenly the coalition becomes a census competition. Kikuyu members, Kamba members, Luhya members, Luo members, Kalenjin members, Kisii members, Somali members. At that point, someone should bring a calculator to the coalition meeting. Here's what I think is actually happening. The united opposition isn't merely fighting over 2027, it is fighting over the post-2027 political hierarchy. Because every politician sitting around that table is asking, if we win, who controls the government? And that question is more dangerous than, how do we defeat Ruto? Because defeating Ruto requires unity, but deciding who replaces him requires competition. And the coalition is beginning that competition before it has. The coalition is beginning that competition before it has even defeated him. Gachagua may be right about the importance of Mount Kenya, but if he appears to demand too much too early, he risks creating exactly what he fears: coalition against him within the coalition. Muturi says his party remains, Munya says his party remains, Kivuti remains relevant. Onyonka is uncomfortable. Other presidential hopefuls are watching, and suddenly Gachagua risks becoming the man everyone needs, but nobody wants to give the steering wheel to. Imagine Ruto sitting in State House watching this. He doesn't have to say anything, just popcorn. Because every disagreement inside the opposition creates negotiating space for the government. One politician gets frustrated, another face is respected, another thinks his party being swallowed, another thinks he deserves the presidential ticket, another wants the deputy presidency, another wants 2032. Eventually, someone says, maybe broad-based isn't so bad after all. You even saw Kindiki telling the likes of Justin Muturi to come back to the government because of that same argument. And that is precisely how opposition coalitions lose members, not necessarily through bribery, sometimes through exhaustion. Justin Muturi is not some ordinary politician who can simply be told, fold your party. He has his own political history, networks, and ambitions. The same applies to Peter Munya. And Lenny Kivuti has his own regional political base. If these parties remain independent, that can actually strengthen the opposition if they coordinate. But if every party becomes an independent presidential project, then the same diversity becomes fragmentation. That distinction is everything. This is where Gachagua's defense has merit. A coalition does not necessarily need one party. Multiple parties can provide polling agents, regional structures, candidates, mobilization networks, parliamentary representation. Gachagua has specifically argued that multiple parties can strengthen the opposition's electoral machinery. So the problem isn't necessarily having many parties. The problem is having many parties with one coalition but different presidential dreams. Imagine this happens in 2027. Gachagua runs, Kalonzo runs, Matiang'i runs, another opposition candidate runs, let's say Sifuna, maybe Onyonka, or another regional heavyweight. Even Orengo decides to run. The ODM has its own calculation. The Linda Mwananchi candidate has its own candidate. And Ruto walks into the election with the advantage of incumbency and a consolidated ruling party machine. The opposition could collectively have more anti-Ruto votes and still lose. Why? Because presidential elections are not won by adding opposition supporters together. They are won by whoever actually gets those votes onto one ballot line or coordinates them effectively. Kenya has seen many times what happens when opposition forces fail to consolidate. If 2007 opposition fragmentation mattered enormously, different candidates attracted different constituencies, and the eventual outcome became one of the most consequential elections in Kenyan history. The lesson isn't that history repeats mechanically. The lesson is vote fragmentation can turn a minority into a winner when the field is sufficiently divided. if I were Ruto's political strategist, not that I am applying for the job, I'd rather one sentence on the wall, let them negotiate. I'd write one sentence on the wall, let them negotiate. Because the longer they negotiate, the longer they remain undecided, the longer they remain undecided, the longer their supporters remain confused. And confused supporters are difficult to mobilize. Let's not pretend Ruto has already won. The Olkalau results demonstrate that DCP has real electoral potential in Mount Kenya. And if Gachagua manages to convert that regional momentum into a disciplined national coalition, he becomes a serious threat. That is precisely why the internal unity becomes a problem that matters. The opposition has something valuable, but it risks fighting over ownership of the treasure before securing the vault. The saddest part is, Kenyans don't wake up every morning thinking about which party should merge with which. They are thinking school fees, food prices, jobs, taxes, healthcare, electricity, rent, security. Yet politicians are spending enormous energy fighting over who gets to negotiate the future government. And this is where opposition leaders need to be careful. If they make 2027 entirely about who gets what, rather than what are we changing, voters can become cynical. So, is united opposition handing Ruto his second term? Wait, don't get too excited. Not yet. But they are certainly making the job easier for him if they continue behaving this way. The greatest threat to the united opposition isn't Muturi, isn't Munya, isn't Onyonka, isn't Gachagua, it isn't Kalonzo, it isn't Matiang'i. The greatest threat is the inability to agree on what happens after they win. Because until they answer that question, every politician will continue protecting his own political future. And every protected political future means one more crack in the opposition wall. So, here's the question I want you to think about. Is Gachagua trying to build the strongest opposition vehicle Kenya has ever seen? Or is his insistence on political control slowly turning potential allies into enemies? Because if Muturi walks away, Munya walks away, Onyonka goes his own way, Matiang'i builds another camp, Kalonzo insists on his own route, and Gachagua insists on his own route, then Ruto doesn't need a political miracle. He simply needs the opposition to keep doing what it is already doing, fighting itself. And that is how you can hand an incumbent a second term, without the incumbent even having to ask for it. If you want Kenyan politics explained beyond the microphone, slogans, and political chair thumping, subscribe to HiiStory. Because sometimes the biggest political story isn't what politicians are saying, it is what their disagreements are quietly making possible. Bye.